Good morning. I'm Rosalie Schaefer. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Manatee County, and I welcome you here today. Today we've got a hot topic on phosphate mining. It has a long history in Manatee County. It has created jobs, produced an important mineral. However, it is also seen as a threat to our natural resources. For example, the long-lasting problem of Piney Point, holding millions of gallons of toxic water. More recently, problems due to a sinkhole in 2016 opened up under a phosphogypsum stack. So we have with us today representatives from all sides of the issue. From the environmental side, we have Andre Mele, a Suncoast Waterkeeper and Vice Chair of the Manatee-Sarasota Sierra Club. From the industry, we have Russell Schweiss, Mosaic Director of Land and Resource Strategies, and representing Manatee County, Charlie Hunsicker, Manatee Director of Parks and Natural Resources. Our speakers today will provide their information and views. There is a lot to be said in this short time. Since part of the program will essentially be a debate, we give those speakers 10 minutes each for their presentations, followed by 2-minute rebuttals. And the order is alphabetical, with Mr. Mele and then Mr. Schweiss. Then Mr. Hunsicker to follow with 12 minutes to tell us about the county's role in all this. After their presentations, we will have questions from the audience. Each speaker may ask one question, and please use the microphone on the floor so that your comments and questions can get into the tape for METV. Also, we recognize that feelings may run high in this issue, so we ask everyone to show respect and not yell out from the audience or make any kind of other disturbances. If anyone does, they will be asked to leave. And when it comes to the questions, please try to ask your question, and then if you have any comments, please consider all the other people waiting in line to ask their question, and try to keep your commentaries to a minute or two. Okay, let's get started. Are you ready?
Hi, thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. 10 minutes is like woefully inadequate to cover this topic. It isn't going to even be a start. This is a, okay, go back, please. Okay, that's a sinkhole that opened up at the top of one of the New Wales gyp stacks in the mid-90s. Go ahead. This is a shot flying over the south gyp stack at New Wales. The most recent 2016 sinkhole is visible off it on the left-hand side. Go ahead. And there it is from directly overhead. This is a slide of the areas that have been mined and are about to be mined. Hopefully not all of them, but you know that's a subject of debate off-site. Back up, please. Okay, so that's probably 700 square miles. By the time you add the brown ones, which are to be permitted or recently permitted, it comes creeping up towards 800 square miles of south Central Florida that nobody really sees, nobody really knows about, but have been scourged right down to the bare earth, and in many cases just left that way. Go ahead. This is what mining looks like nowadays. It used to be up until the 50s, 60s, it's sort of pit mining. Then with the advent of the Green Revolution and a great increase in demand for phosphate, the mining process itself became industrialized. That boom on that dragline is about the length of a football field. That school bus is not full of children, but it's still full of migrant workers. The dust in the air is characteristics of some days in the middle of the mining process. Sometimes it's not dusty, sometimes it is dusty. Go ahead. This is me standing inside of one of the dragline buckets. This is an old one, actually. It's smaller. The new ones are much, much larger, but still, I don't know, it's impressive, I think. After this stuff is mined, it gets sent to a separation plant, float plant, beneficiation plant, all the same thing, where the stuff gets, the usable ore gets floated to the surface and shipped off to a fertilizer plant, which the people who work there call an acid plant, because I guess everything in there is acid. Sulfuric acid stimulates the production of phosphoric acid. The sort of waste product from the beneficiation process goes up into a clay settling area. It's clay and sand that is sort of associated with the phosphate but left behind once the phosphate's been floated out. But it is also, next slide please, it's also in company with, adhered to, or somehow bound to a whole lot of stuff that we don't know about or stuff that we don't really want loose in the environment. It's, for instance, waste fuel oils. There are millions of gallons, some people say as much as 1 billion gallons of waste fuel oils loose in these clay settling areas throughout the Bone Valley since the beginning of time. So it's a lot. This is a fertilizer plant. This is the one at Riverview. That's the Alafaya River, beautiful river. Next. And that's the Riverview stack. The right-hand side is the original part of that stack. Then it was expanded, and the left-hand side, I was driving up there just the other day on the way to a conference, and I saw that the new part is almost as tall as the original part. You can see the fertilizer plant in the background. Back in the day, long before Mosaic, they used to dump the phosphogypsum into the river. Go ahead. So the stacks were mandated by EPA. It's not something that Mosaic is thrilled to be having to deal with either, I'm sure. Okay, this is what mining does to the land viewed from outer space. The part surrounded in yellow has not been mined. The part up above has. You can see the distinctive rectangular geometric landforms and scarred areas and areas with with algae-filled ponds and stuff like that. A lot of it is going to be clay settling areas. As much as 40%. Go ahead. The land starts looking like this. This is agricultural land, big beautiful live oak. Next. Or, oh God, that slide. That is a slide, believe it or not, of a beautiful native habitat, a pine flatwoods. Next. And this is a sort of an overgrown fallow cattle ranch that's on the Ona mine property. And these are some of the denizens of that land. Go ahead. Crested caracara, gopher tortoise, and this is what they do to it. They burn it. They burn it. Talk about a scorched earth policy. They burn it down to the ground. Now, it has to be said that they do have a program for rescuing or somehow dislocating those endangered species and as many species as they could get their hands on. The people who work for Mosaic are not cruel. They're not inhumane. It's just that this process is so huge and so destructive that, I'm not saying there's bald eagles being toasted alive in there, but I don't know where they went. Our beef, what Mosaic will tell us is that the species will somehow magically know when it's safe to come back, and they'll find their way back once the land has been reclaimed and regrown, like 60 years from now. And so, we have a serious and I believe legitimate beef with that whole concept. Go ahead. So they're mining. That's just a view from somebody's house. And this is what the land looks like while it's being mined, after it's being mined, before it's reclaimed. Go ahead. Next. This is what parts of Manatee County are looking like right now. Go ahead. I believe we're approaching about 10%. Okay, stop right there. Now this is, as far as the eye can see, this is mined land, and or formerly mined land, and all those water forms are either clay settling areas or just ponds that they left here. The phosphate deposits are down, in some cases, 50, 60 feet deep. They're maybe 20 feet thick. And once they're removed, there's not enough dirt to backfill the land. So they wind up leaving a lot of it in those ponds, which are, some of them are clay settling areas, some of them are just ponds, and even the reclaimed area, the figures run as high as from 2.5 to 22 times as radioactive as the basic ground was before it was mined and reclaimed. Reclaimed land is more radioactive. Go ahead. And so Mosaic makes claims like this. They present these photographs to us, but in fact, reclamation does not require, when they do wetlands, they're required by law to put them back to a higher degree than just basic land, but it's still sort of a Potemkin village. It's still it's not full restoration, it's not even close, it's reclamation. Reclamation is required by law, it's not being done out of the generosity of their hearts. Go ahead. It sort of looks like that. Next. And so they probably, we're growing a future for creatures great and small. I'm sorry, this one bugs me endlessly. Next slide. Because I don't see anything that's growing a future for creatures great and small in slides like this. Next. And they also claim they're creating new jobs and economic opportunities. But at the hearings over at Manatee County, Bart Arrington was finally cornered after dancing around in every possible way he could. He finally just said, no, there are no new jobs created with a new mine. Which that confirms. Go ahead. So where's the public benefit? I'm not going to ask you to read all that. I don't have time. I'm probably out of time right now. Flip it. Go ahead. Let's talk about risk. These are overtly toxic releases of stuff listed in EPA's toxic release inventory. Almost 5 million pounds per year coming out of the then, at that point, 5 plants. It's probably less than that now because there's only, 3 running now? There's only 3 acid plants going? Or is it 4? They're not talking to me. Okay, 3 concentrate facilities, thank you. I'm not using the right terminology, apparently. That's what the phosphogypsum stacks look like. Since EPA reached a settlement with Mosaic for $2 billion to make up for the fact that some of the stacks have been contaminated with some of that toxic waste over the course of years, and nobody really knows how much of these stacks is toxic now or is not toxic. They had to come up with a settlement to remediate those stacks to a higher level than they might have been when they were merely hazardous. Go ahead. Slide. Yeah. Okay. This is the Riverview concentrate plant in the midst of a full-blown emergency. They claim it was ammonia being released. There were people sickened for miles around. Go ahead. In the last few years. Fine radioactive particles, that's the take-home message. They do blow off the phosphogypsum stacks. I have Department of Interior studies from some years ago. They're very small. Go ahead. They're well down in the realm of the parts, the size that the EPA regulates in terms of air quality. This is a dusty day at the old gyp stack. Go ahead. Looking down from space, again, Progress Village. Progress Village is a community right adjacent to that gyp stack. That's Riverview gyp stack. There's other communities right nearby. Thousands of people live right there. Occasionally, the stacks will breach. Occasionally, they will contaminate nearby water bodies. The Alafaya River was decimated. The Tampa Bay Times, and I quote, said that the 30 miles of the Alafaya River were as dead as a sewer hole. A sewer pipe, whatever it was. Peace River has been annihilated twice. This is another gyp stack breach. Go ahead. Lots of health issues that we keep hearing about, but so far it's just anecdotal evidence. There's been no epidemiological studies despite repeated entreaties to all the health agencies. Then we get to the point of why this is all happening. We help feed the world and make the most of its resources. That's our promise. Okay. That's cruel and unusual. Needless to say, there are alternatives, and if I'm allowed to, I'll get to them. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Russell Schweiss. I am the Vice President of Mine Permitting, Land Management, and Public Affairs for Mosaic. So I'm over the functions that permit mining, and I'm also over the land management function, which includes our agricultural operations and our public affairs, so our community relations efforts as well. Next slide, Jackie. So I found this picture on the internet, and I thought it was worth talking about. We have a very challenging information environment we all live in right now. There's a lot of information that floats around out there. When I was a kid, you would get your information from the news, you get from the TV news and from the newspaper, where you had lines of editorial and fact-checking that went on. We live in a world of social media now where there's a lot floating around, and I think that a healthy skepticism, if we're going to continue to be the great country we are, we have to live in this environment with a healthy skepticism and verify things. Things like anecdotal or things like some people say, those are flags. You've got to look and see where does that come from. Next slide. So Andy mentioned the Green Revolution. So that was something that this guy Norman Borlaug, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, was considered the father of. And so Norman Borlaug was an agronomist, but also known more so as a humanitarian. And he's credited with saving about 1 billion people from famine in his lifetime. And he was quoted in the early 2000s as saying, "This is a basic problem to feed 6.6 million people. Without fertilizer, forget it, the game is over." We're at 7 billion now, and nothing has changed that would make that untrue. Next slide, Jackie. So let's start with the basics. What is phosphate, and where do we get it from? So phosphate is an element. You cannot substitute for an element. This is 8th grade chemistry. If it's on that periodic chart, it is a basic building block. And it's in our bones, it's in our DNA, it helps power our cells. If you remember from those biology classes, your mitochondria uses ATP, that's phosphate, it helps power the cells. So it's absolutely necessary, and we get it from the food we eat. Our body takes what it needs and it passes the rest through, which is why nutrient management is critical in all phases of the food cycle. And in Florida, we are feeling that now more than you would see anywhere. So next. So where does it come from? So there's really, these 5 places provide the majority of the world's phosphate. Phosphate's responsible for 40 to 60% of crop yields. So proportionally, these 5 nations are really who's responsible for providing that benefit to feed the world. Oftentimes, one of the criticisms you'll hear is people saying we're exporting all of the phosphate, we're not getting any benefit from it. So I thought I'd share the statistics, and I know it's hard to read back there, I apologize. 53% of what we produce in Florida and Louisiana is distributed to North American customers. When you take that to all of the Americas, that's 90% of what we produce. It stays in this hemisphere. And by the way, the USDA says that 90% of the American food supply comes from this hemisphere. So the phosphate you're walking around with in your body, a lot of that came out of mines in Florida. And many people who are opposed to phosphate mining have called for an end. Let's stop it now. Let's just quit. And I think it's important that people understand what the implication of that is. It seems crazy to think about in the United States, but the majority of the world's population spends 70 to 90% of their income on food. If you take out 20% of the world's supply of phosphate, there's going to be a ripple effect through all the way to the price of food. And if you do that, those people who are paying that much of their income towards food are going to have a problem. So people who are advocating that should really contemplate what they're saying. The other thing to contemplate is, of these, which country would you expect might have the toughest environmental regulations on these types of activities? Morocco sends their gypsum and their processed water straight to the ocean. And if you have an environmental bent, and they're the ones with the capacity that would actually take up for Florida if we shut down, if you have an environmental bent to you, I would think that what happens over there matters. And the better way to do it is to figure out ways that we can get together and come up with solutions here to provide the assurances that people need for this production. Keep going. So in Manatee County, it's mining. We don't have any manufacturing facilities or concentrate facilities or acid plants, as Andy called them, in Manatee County. We have mining. And you see a lot of videos on the internet where people are flying over and they're showing pictures of the mining. And mining is not a pretty process. But this slide shows a progression. So in 1995, the pre-mined state, it's hard to see this slide on here, I'm sorry, 2000, whenever it was mined and they were beginning to reclaim it, they're backfilling it with sand. So sand comes out of that plant and we put it back there and we use that to then contour the land. And then in 2019, the current state, you'll see the orange groves are back. You'll see the reclamation that's happened on the right is created some herbaceous wetlands that then help filter water that eventually makes its way to the Peace River. Keep going. And so this is what that wetland looks like, that wetland system looks like on the ground. This is Marin Run. We've created that stream, and this is a forested wetland that's within that stream. This has all been mined. So all those pictures of those mine cuts that look like a moonscape, that's what that looks like now. And this wasn't 60 years. This was not 60 years. Remember, that mining was in 2000, and this is what it looks like in 2019. That's in Polk County at our South Fort Meade mine. So next slide. And as far as it not being suitable for wildlife, I took this picture on Friday. I knew I'd have a captive audience, and I could show them you guys my fish. I caught this bass at our reclaimed lake that's at the former Payne Creek mine site. I took my daughter fishing. I didn't want to show her picture and embarrass her because she didn't catch one that big. So next slide. So another thing that we've been accused of is contributing to red tide. And it's, I put this quote on here from H.L. Mencken, and maybe there's some of you who know who he was. He was a satirist. For every complex problem, there's a solution that's clear, simple, and wrong. First of all, there's not a single red tide expert that's pointed the finger at us. And even there was one that presented to SHNEP just last week who said, the West Coast is a nitrogen-limited system. It can't be phosphate. If you look beyond that, let's just go to the logic of it. So if we're saying that red tide's way worse now than it was, say, 30 years ago, well, 30 years ago, you had nine concentrator acid plants, since Andy likes that term, operating in Central Florida, and you had about 30 drag lines mining. We have 3 now, and there's about 8 drag lines mining at any given time. Logic would tell you that if you've got a change in red tide, you would look to something that is intensified inland. And phosphate mining has not intensified. There were 20 companies operating back then. There's 1 now, and we're operating 3 mines and 3 concentrate facilities. So, go ahead, next slide. So just in conclusion, it's a short presentation. I have the same concern Andy does, is there's a lot more I'd like to talk about. No industry is perfect, but every industry is better than it was 40 years ago. And we continue to seek to make what we do better every day. And I'd like, how much time do I have left?
You've got 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Okay, so I can use my anecdote. So I've spent my adult life in Florida, but I grew up in the Midwest. My family, we've been coal miners, farmers, and brewers. My great-grandfather died of black lung disease, so my family understands that mining can be hazardous. I have distant cousins that still work in that. It's a much safer industry now, but I'd like to talk about the family farm. My granddad used to go out and disc the soil and taste it to figure out what he put on it. My cousins and my uncle, they go out and they're using terabytes of data, they're using satellite imagery, and they're not putting a molecule more than they need on their field because that's money lost if it leaves the field. It's the same, we have grown in this, we've had to grow with our customer or our customer will leave us behind. But I'd also like to say that, if you look around the room, find something that wasn't mined or grown. Everything we rely on was either mined or grown, and if you look at what we do, we mine stuff so that you can grow things. And you can only do that where the mineral exists. And I guarantee you, anything that you use, there was something mined, and there's somebody that didn't want that mine there. I don't have time for the video.
Now we're going to entertain rebuttals. We'll have Mr. Mele back.
I always appreciate listening to Russell talk because he's a pretty squared away guy and has command of his facts. But I would like to ask of him the respect to assume that I also have command of my facts. I'm not a Facebook guy. I'm not an internet guy. Whatever I put up there is from primary sources, and when it's not, I say so. I said anecdotal about the health reports, and so, you know, anyhow, so I just said that. These guys try hard, yes, industry is improving every day. There's a gyp stack in Louisiana, St. James Parish, right now that's crumbling, that's collapsing. It's on the verge of, everybody's working on it to keep it from going into a state that nobody wants it to go into. I don't want to use the word collapse. I don't know, I haven't seen it, but there's a Mosaic gyp stack in St. James Parish, Louisiana right now that is in bad shape. There was a dam. Mosaic acquired, I think it's pronounced Vale fertilizer, SA, in Brazil a couple years back, or a year back, and the parent company, or a Vale SA dam just blew. You're shaking your head at me.
No, we don't own Vale. We bought their fertilizer.
You bought their fertilizer arm, I know. But it's an association. It's an association with a dam that just went down and killed 200 people. And anyhow, it may have nothing to do with the fertilizer. 70% of the phosphorus on this planet is in Morocco. And because we have phosphorus under our feet right here, I don't think obliges us to accede to the profit-making demands of a Fortune 500 corporation. I think we have every right to say no, except for the fact that we have this thing in Florida called the Burt-Harris Act. And that basically says that if you've given them a permit once, you have to give them all the permits they want. So stand back and be prepared for more of Manatee County to get mined, and your county commission is not going to be able to do a thing to stop it. Thank you.
All right, so just to be clear on the Vale portion. So Vale had a dam at an iron mine that collapsed in Brazil, and they do a different type of mining called open pit there, and they use valley fills for their tailings, which is not anything similar to what we do in Florida. But also what we purchased from Vale was a fertilizer business unit that they had purchased from a company called Bunge just a few years before. So the dams that we inherited weren't constructed by Vale. So the association is that, and I've seen it. I saw Andy, and I think Andy just probably misunderstood that because I saw that he published in the DeSoto newspaper that Vale was a subsidiary of Mosaic. That is not the case. And we do not have any liability or association with that failure. With regard to our Louisiana facility, we did have a issue where in a farm field to the north, there was a bulge in that field after the farmer harvested the cane. He pointed it out to us. And we are in the process of taking measures to stop what is we were seeing first about a ½ inch of creep on the gyp stack. And keep in mind, these dam walls are about 1,000 feet wide, so you can't see it. It's moved, but you can't see it if you're looking at it. And what we've taken a lot of countermeasures on that now, and that has slowed the movement of that. What we found is that there was there's something going on geologically 95 feet below that is causing lateral movement. So the movement is actually 95 feet below natural grade. And we've now gotten some geologists from some universities out there. They're experts there, and it's very the geology in that area, because that's where the Mississippi River naturally is. The river is now uphill because the Corps has diked it all off. The geology is different because okay. This is a challenging format.
Thank you. I'm going to take full advantage of my time by jumping into this. This is not a debate necessarily. I think that's information for you all. I think your questions are going to be much more valuable than what I can tell you here, but I'm obliged and desire to tell you what's going on from our standpoint. I came out of University of Wisconsin with a degree in agriculture, followed by a master's degree in urban and regional planning, but it's not about me. I also served 4 years appointed by Governor by Governor Graham, and then by Governor Martinez to serve on the Florida Institute of Phosphate Research. And working with my colleague in the back of the room, Dick Eckenrod, we were both county employees at the time. We wrote the first mining ordinance here in Manatee County in the year 1981 in consult with our environmental attorneys at the time. Since that time, we had a substantial rewrite of our mining ordinance in 2004, which dramatically improved and intensified the level of review your government, your Board of County Commissioners, and your professional staff apply to the review of mining. This is our role. Our role is not to approve or deny. Our role as professional staff is to make sure that the requirements that are in the law are met by the company making an application here in Manatee County. We can recommend denial on things, and we can recommend approval on things, but those recommendations are based on meeting the criteria in an ordinance. I'm trying to emphasize what Mr. Mele said at one point in time. Manatee County has a mining ordinance. We do not have an anti-mining ordinance. Just like we have a development ordinance here, land development code, that says if you meet criteria as landowner, you have a right to issuance of a permit to do what you want to do on your land, if you meet all of the criteria, no exceptions. The same process goes through here in Manatee County with our mining ordinance. Now, a few salient facts about our approach. And before I go any further, I've neglected to introduce a few people here that are very important to me. Of course, our newly elected Commissioner, Misty Servier. Misty, please stand. Of course, Misty, thank you, and thank you for coming today for this important debate. Of course, Misty, your past lives and your current one is based on registration as the American Institute of Certified Planners, very well and competent in the law of planning. Along with Alyssa Powers, please, Powers. Alyssa and her supervisor, Rob Brown, work in the Department of Parks and Natural Resources to regulate the industry and review those applications and ensure they meet them. A lot of questions rotate around the company's protection of our natural resources as they relate to water, floodplains, wetlands. And as a certified wetland scientist, I think you have in Alyssa and the staff that works with her a high-powered ability to review and evaluate. I'm also going to mention Damon Moore and Aaron Stuzeri here, also participating not in the regulatory side, but these two people who also work with Manatee County are experts in the field of reclamation and understanding. If you wonder what happened and why we have Robinson Preserve and Perico Preserve and other locations around the county, it's the contributions of Damon Moore and Aaron, who are working together to make sure we have a restoration product here in Manatee County that's heads and shoulders above others. And we apply that same care in reviewing phosphate mining. I want to say that Manatee County does not allow chemical manufacturing in Manatee County. That was part of our ordinance. We set that apart. There was no chemical beneficiation going on when we wrote the ordinances in Manatee County. Piney Point had long since been retired. They were closed. And we were able to prohibit new chemical processing mines in Manatee County. So that will not come back to us unless the law is changed. We no longer allow mining in the watershed of Lake Manatee. When I came here in 1977, I was faced with 7 mines that owned property in Manatee County. Approximately 40% of our drinking water watershed was captured by ownership of mines. And we have, through rigorous application of our rules, controlled and limited that expansion, and now we no longer allow it in the Lake Manatee watershed, except, again, not a prohibition, but with extraordinary steps and demonstrations that must take place. So there's that. But in the process of following these requirements with Manatee County, we look at the plans that are prepared. And you all have a role in those plans as they're prepared, because we have a number of public hearings, we have workshops with the commissioners. The public has extensive participation in the past with the way in which our mining permits have gone on. I'm trying to say there is nothing happens in the back room, unlike some other states that go on. In Florida, we're very open and very transparent as these things happen. Under mining, is our mining ordinance more stringent than the state? Well, it is. And let me identify on several things. All state regulators and federal regulators look at natural resources in their protection. They apply 3 standards: First of all, if you want to disturb these natural resources, be they wetlands or other things, they say, well, first of all, you should avoid that. And then, well, if you can't avoid those things, what you have to impact, you should minimize. Because, meaning, don't do it enough, do it less, do it with less intensity. And if you can't minimize, then you can mitigate the losses that are unavoidably taken in the process of whether you're fishing, whether you're mining, whether you're developing land, all the things that affect our natural resources. So avoidance, minimization, and mitigation. We have a higher standard of avoidance than the state of Florida in regulating mining. We'd like to be able to say we set aside wetlands and natural systems and say, we think these high-quality wetlands need not be mined, and in many instances, the mining companies have agreed in negotiations, open to the public, on whether or not they agree. Well, okay, even though we have a right to mine those, we'll respect the process and we will step back and not mine. We will avoid. We also try to minimize by protecting some of our off-site wetlands and increasing the buffers around wetlands that go beyond the minimum state standards. Now, when it comes to mitigation, all the requirements for mitigation of wetlands are driven not by Manatee County, but they're driven by the state of Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I wish they could be here today for a partnership in this discussion, because many of the requirements are driven by the state and require the local governments to follow those requirements. I'm not going to say I'm passing it off, it's all the state, it's not us, but in many instances, it is the state. The Army Corps of Engineers and EPA was charged by the federal government to do an area-wide environmental impact statement, to look at the cumulative effect of a number of mines, not just a single focus impact, because of course the resources are all connected across many counties and many applications over a long period of time. The purpose of an area-wide environmental impact statement is to look at locations over many counties over a long period of time and describe what those impacts are. Many of you participated in the public process that came through with that. The conclusion boils down to, after about 400 pages of documentation, was that while surface mining and extraction is a major impact, it provides deliberate effects and impacts to our natural resources. The conclusion was that each of those impacts can be mitigated. That third line. So when we say, all right, they can be mitigated, but before they do, Manatee County will try to assure that those that can be avoided are, where the impacts are significant, they're minimized, and where they cannot be, we follow the state guideline, they can be mitigated. I wanted to say also something about the fact that under reclamation, we got plans, we got mines, and then what happens afterwards? The reclamation standards that we have here in Manatee County are also more stringent than the states. We require in the restoration of lands a demonstration by the company, professionally certified independently, that the plant species in a restoration are fully resplendent and more diverse than what the state or federal government would require. Because, right, Damon Moore said this to me once, if you get the plants right, then the animals come in. And if you get the animals right, you've succeeded. We not only try to get more diversity in our plant species for our Manatee County reclamation standards, but we also seek to get more diversity in the animals that we have. He said, before we release and tell you, Phosphate Company, that you have met the requirements of reclamation, we want to see the plants and animals that were there before returned. And when they're not there, for some reason or another, that places a great burden on the industry to be able to prove this or demonstrate it, we don't release those lands. We hold on to their restoration bonds. We hold on to the requirements. We say, you haven't finished yet. And we have that ability to do that. And we also, in the reclamation, we do look at water, because on the coastlines, we've learned that elevation is important for the tides to come in and leave the property. And the uplands where mining is taking place, surface waters and groundwaters have to work together to make sure wetlands are continuously fed with the amount of water needed to make them healthy, that slopes and seeps are there. And we look at, first of all, we ask the company to model, time's up? Oh, okay. But let me conclude, and we'll take questions. I have the story on Piney Point, if you'd like to hear that later. And I have the story on the fact that I want you to trust, I certainly want you to trust the expertise of your Board of County Commissioners and the expertise of your county staff in advising the board the right path for phosphate mining. I'm telling you, you've got the best working here in Manatee County for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will entertain questions from the public. And I ask a question, you can direct it at one member of the panel or to more than one member of the panel. And we can begin our discussions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rosalie. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this topic up for our discussion today. I want to thank Commissioner Misty Servia for being here and for what you're doing and trying to help with this issue. My question is directed at Mr. Schweiss. You mentioned that you want to find ways to provide assurances to the public. And I want to ask you about how long it took. In fact, it took the media before you actually explained to the public about the sinkhole in 2016. It was right after 2015 when Mosaic was fined $1.8 billion for cleanup at Louisiana and Florida mines and pledged to be better stewards. And a year later, that sinkhole collapse ended up causing 215 million gallons of radioactive toxic waste to fall into the aquifer. And about 2 years after that, I was diagnosed with 3 kinds of cancers, and my doctors at Moffitt asked me where I had been exposed to Chernobyl levels of radiation. All 3 of my cancers have biomarkers that are common and are caused by radiation. And so when you talk about assurances, why have you minimized the level of toxicity in the aquifer when we know that it is toxic? My water was tested after Moffitt suggested that I look for the environmental cause. My genetic tests, many series of genetic tests came back fine for cancer. My lifestyle came back non-existent risk for cancers of the kind that I have. However, I have a horse at my home drinking the same water, and he has cancer. And the kind of cancer he has is extremely rare in horses, but I read in the newspaper that common cancers in livestock near the mines include thyroid and bone cancers. One of my cancers was thyroid. My horse has bone cancer. And so there's plenty of correlation on these facts alone. The first thing I did when learning about the radiation in my water, it's, by the way, 3 times above safe limits for radium. It's high in both alpha and beta emitters. The first thing I did was notify my neighbors. And then I notified the people around my neighborhood. I notified my county commissioners. I notified the media. And we started to get the word out. And people started sending me their tests. They are higher than safe limits in radium. And the test that was closest to the mines was the highest of all. So there's all kinds of correlation. My doctors do not think this is a coincidence. And so my question to you is, why did it take 20 days, or why did it take the media, actually, that found out in time to notify the public? And why does Mosaic continue to pledge to be good neighbors but minimize the risks to its citizens? By the way, I put the link to the labs to test your water on the table. There's a picture of my horse on here and our property near Lake Manatee, and you'll see the link to the labs and a link to a presentation by Jacqueline Lopez at Stetson School of Law. She's one of the foremost experts on phosphate dangers and health concerns. So talk to us about assurances from you and how you've demonstrated you're being a good neighbor in helping to inform us of the dangers. There are people drinking this water still that I haven't been able to reach. The county hasn't done anything yet to inform the public. They tell me it's a state issue. The aquifer belongs to the state. And the state, we know, was complicit with you for 20 days in its silence when that sinkhole collapsed.
So first, let me say that if you own a well, and I have a well as well, and I'm in Lithia, so I am about 15 minutes from the New Wales facility. If you own a well, you should have your well tested on a regular basis. In Florida, depending on the depth of where the well was placed, you could be in a geological strata that and has naturally occurring radium in it. And there are a lot of people in Florida that are nowhere near our mines that have issues with radium in their well. Now second, with regard to the public notification on New Wales, we have said in the past that that was a mistake, and we absolutely should have come forward. When we started noticing that we were having this issue that I only had 2 minutes and I couldn't really explain what was going on with the issue in Louisiana, we went to the public as soon as we realized we had an issue in Louisiana. We learned from that the criticism was rightly placed. And I will say that without any hesitancy, that the criticism was rightly placed. And if we ever have in Florida some environmental issue that we feel like is something that is a serious issue, we're going to come forward and say, here's what we're doing to prevent something from happening, and we're going to do that in a timely manner, and we're going to be as straightforward and forthcoming with the information that we have on hand. With regard to your health issues, I'm not a doctor. I cannot diagnose what was causal with your issue. As far as the plume that was formed whenever that water went into the aquifer, mapping plumes and remediating plumes is not new science. So we took the measures that are pretty standard in waste management practices in order to be able to recover that. We created back pressure by instituting those recovery wells, which create a cone that pulls pressure back, and we put wells in the ground to monitor the constituents in the water at varying depths for all the way almost a mile, which was all the way to the edge of the property is almost a mile. We have wells at varying depths the whole way through there to monitor for those constituents. And we have that monitoring program is being peer reviewed by the state. So we've put all of those assurances in place, and we created a drinking water program for people that were around there so that we could provide them with drinking water and do successive testing of their wells in order to provide the assurances that their wells were unaffected.
Okay,
Next question. Judging from the line, I'll just stay here. Glenn's got something for me.
My name is Glenn Giblin. I'm a community activist, and my question is for you. I'm a numbers guy, and I deal with facts. So the facts are we have tourism and we have phosphate mining. So which are the better of the two? If you look at Sarasota County, who, by the way, doesn't allow any phosphate mining, and they're booming. So let's look at the numbers. In the last 20 years, and this is violation tracker, okay, Mosaic has accumulated $851 million in fines. Now, if I were going to have a trucking company and somebody had 15 driver's license violations and one had none, who would I pick? So you're right. They may have the right to operate, but not under these. They had 28 environmental fines, 23 work safety violations, railroad wage and hour labor, on and on and on. Who puts $1 billion aside for fines? 2015, $810 million fine. You're a bad steward of our property, particularly in Manatee County. 2009, $34 million in fines. 2016, just a few years ago, 4 million fines at the Lake Wales. On and on and on. You are not a good steward of the land. We do not need phosphate mining. And your spiel about feeds the world, I guess we don't have any organic farmers because I'm one of them, and we do very well without your fertilizer. So when are you going to straighten out your act and quit piling up billions of dollars worth of fines? This is your track record, and anybody can look it up at Track Vision on the internet. Those are the facts. You're a bad steward of the line. You don't belong in Manatee County.
So Can I make some remark addressing? Can I make some remark addressing before we just line up? So one of the things that was brought up was this settlement that Andy brought up, which was $2 billion. So what that was is the entire phosphate industry was interpreting the Bevel exemption that's under the law differently than the EPA saw it. And this was a matter of how you mix your waste streams on site. It's not a matter of a release. It's not a matter of something that went off site. It's a matter of how you mix those waste streams on site. And the biggest component of that, 1.8 billion of that 2 billion that everyone cites, was money that we set aside into a trust fund. And that money that we set aside into a trust fund guarantees the funding for the closure of all the active stacks that we are operating in the state of Florida and Louisiana. So, you know, Charlie mentioned Piney Point, where there was an operator that went bankrupt and walked away from it and left the state with that on their hands. They left two. They left Piney Point and they left Mulberry Phosphates. We have been the ones closing Mulberry Phosphates for the state because of its proximity to another facility where we can get rid of that processed water, we can consume that processed water. So that one hasn't created as much angst as Piney Point, where it doesn't have the advantage of that geography. But okay, one last sentence then. So what that trust fund did was ensured that would never happen again. The closure of those stacks is paid for. It's already set aside. Thank you. With the exception of Piney Point, because this was a settlement with us, Piney Point's not our property.
Hi there, Anna Serena. My question's for Mr. Weiss. Can you share with us how many acres you've reclaimed in Manatee County?
That's a pretty specific statistic I don't have off the top of my head. Ashley, you have any idea?
Do you have an idea of when you can share that information or planned reclamation plans for the lands already mined?
There's reclamation plans on file, and I don't know whether Manatee County has a statistic on what's been reclaimed, but
Thank you.
Off the top of their head.
Candace Luther. My questions are actually for Charlie Hunsicker, but I want to correct you with your list of where does phosphate come from now, because China stopped mining phosphate last year because it's too harmful to the environment and there are too many regulations that would be violated in order for them to continue. So now they're buying from Florida now.
No, they exported about 14 million tons last year.
That's what I said. They stopped.
And they're still exporting.
Okay, my questions are for Charlie. Why is nobody in our county testing or addressing any of the cyanobacteria or hazardous chemicals in our water? I did a test myself, which I have in my hand here, that identified 4 different neurotoxins, specifically anatoxins, saxitoxins, microcystins, and cylindrospermopsins. And everyone seems to be focused on red tide as a source of all the pollution and death of aquatic life. And the truth of the matter is only a small portion of the issue is from red tide. Mosaic discharges numerous toxic chemicals into our waterways, but because they dilute them to what is considered acceptable levels, no one seems to care that they're still dumping the same amount of crap. Our county knows that Piney Point is a huge disaster waiting to happen if a large breach occurs, yet continues to issue new permits for them to continue doing the same thing out east where nobody actually sees it. These same chemicals are being dumped into Lake Manatee, Manatee River, Myakka River, and the Peace River, and no one has any source or drinking water tests for Manatee County or the city of Manatee since 2017. There's no test for radiation, source or drinking water, and I would like to see the weekly tests being done by an outside independent lab to ensure that our water is safe. And I'm going to also add to Becky's comment, my greyhound just died 2 weeks ago from bone cancer as well.
This is like the Prime Minister's questions. I want to reply that, first of all, your drinking water, processed through both Manatee County's water treatment plant and the city of Bradenton's water treatment plant, is thoroughly tested for the whole suite of priority pollutants issued by the federal government and the state of Florida to assure our personal health. I'll say that without exception. So I'm not the water treatment plant operator nor the utilities director, but my experience here in Manatee County has proven to me that we do thoroughly test that. Now, your individual wells are not the purview of the Board of County Commissioners nor their budget.
I didn't ask about well water, I asked about county and city drinking water.
Okay.
I don't need drinking water, I don't have a well, but I
Okay.
can't find any water quality tests.
Okay,
That
well,
was my question.
yes. She was just trying to clarify a question. She wasn't talking about wells, she was talking about drinking water. So I encourage you to have a conversation with Mark Simpson, who's the division manager over water in our utility system, or his boss, Mike Gore, in the utility system. And for that matter, the same questions to the city of Bradenton's utilities group. What tests are conducted, how often, and what are the results? So please. Sure.
Yeah, we are out of time for our program, but METV has given us permission to go over our time for about 10 minutes if you'd like to stay and continue the discussion. And again, please direct your question to one or more of the panel members, and try to keep the discussion down to 1 minute or so.
And I can clarify this again, but there's no connection. Again, there is no connection between the removal of phosphate ore in Manatee County to what had occurred at Piney Point. So to say that Manatee County continues to allow the Piney Point problem to proliferate by allowing mining in eastern Manatee County, there's really no connection.
We're continuing to create more clay settling areas, even though we know clay settling areas are dangerous.
Okay, well, clay settling areas, we do have those. But I want to try and keep that Piney Point problem separate and the state plan for closure of that facility, which is out there and known. Okay, sorry.
How are you? My question is actually for the Mosaic representatives. My name is Luella Phillips. I'm from Getting the Word Out Environmental Truth and Florida 67 Environmentalists United Coalition. I live in Mulberry. I'm 3.7 miles from that sinkhole, and y'all can see I'm getting emotional because these people are full of it. I live every day 3 miles, a little over 3 miles from the Mosaic sinkhole. I live in between Hooker's Prairie, where you leave your tailings piles. I live 5 miles as the crow flies from the Mosaic facility on Highway 60, and I live 3.7 miles, like I said, from the Mosaic sinkhole. My question to you is, why doesn't Mosaic pay an outside representative or an outside tester for our water? You come in and you say, oh, your water's okay. But when the first 9 wells came up high in radiation, you said you weren't responsible for that. You couldn't take responsibility because you had no prior records to compare them to. In 89, 90, early 90s, and late 80s, ECT came in and checked our water for IMC. But they did check for a few more things than what ECT is checking for now. You guys don't check for anything that can't be regulated by the EPA. You check for pH balance, a little salt here and there. You don't check for the heavy metals that you're putting in there that could have been dumped by that sinkhole and was. Not including the sinkholes prior to that happened at IMC, not including the dam that broke at Highway 60 and had a fish kill for 40 miles. What I want to ask you is, how come you don't come out and test our water for what you're actually dumping into it? ECT is an environmental consultant. They show you how to make money, where to save money. You're telling them what to test for, but you're not testing for what you actually dumped in there. And as far as environmentalists, I think you're giving us a bad rep, because we're not here to stop Mosaic. We're here to stop you from dumping your crap on our children and our families and our environment. My mother went from 0 cancer to stage 3 in less than 6 months. It grew 4 centimeters in less than 2 weeks. My grandmother, who ate those fish that you gave your daughter yesterday, if you ate them every day on a daily basis, or every weekend for that matter, can I just finish this real quick? My grandparents died of cancer. I had to be checked for cancer at the age of 16. I have health surveys. You can go to Getting Word Out and check them out. But what I'm trying to say to you is, don't come up here and tell us what good stewards you are and how good you're being to us when you don't even care about our children. And so, like I said, my question is why do you lie to the public and say you're testing the water for what it could have happened, and you're not? My radiation level is 4.2 just in my front yard. Thank you.
So what we tested people's wells for after the New Wales sinkhole was we were testing for constituents which would only be present if processed water from that sinkhole had made the way into their wells. Because there are constituents that don't naturally exist within Florida's aquifers that we can test for. So if we're looking for an impact, we're going to look for those things. Radium, these other things, those things, there are a lot of people. If you have a well and you're in here right now and you don't test your well, you should, because radium can be in your well depending on how it was installed. And there are a lot of people in Florida who have really old, shallow wells where there are water quality issues. But again, what we tested for were for elements that would only exist in the water if there was processed water that was making it to that well.
No, you did not. No, you did not. Not in our garden.
Next question. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for holding this important forum. All right, for many a decade, I have attended dozens of Manatee County Commission meetings where Mosaic Mining has sought approval for further destruction of Florida's landscape. In relation to my question, I attended the 2012 Phosphate Conference in Punta Gorda that Charlie mentioned, where Dr. Nora Demers gave a PowerPoint presentation explaining how Mosaic attempts to claim their reclamation and release rate as being over 40%. This was the 2012, okay? We're going there. And what this did was Mosaic contradicted her claims, which stated the actual reclamation and release rates were only in the lower single digits. Now, my question is, and I don't know if you've ever been asked this, but I'm asking it today. How many of the over hundreds of thousands of acres affected by Mosaic operations have been reclaimed and released, this is the important part, using submitted modifications and FDEP variances that can continue for 20 years or more that excuse you from further action? And what this does, it allows the mineral rights royalties to be distributed, often to our county, our state, and you use the excuse, there's a shortage of sand, or we have low oxygen levels on the property waters. FDEP has granted you so many variances. You need to go back and look at them all. Nora Demers had a stack this high. And some of them, as I said, 20 years, some of them more, some of them less. And the modifications that you put in to get excuses for not reclaiming this stuff is too much. So that's my question. How many acres that were reclaimed and released using modifications and FDEP variances are there?
So you're asking for a very specific number that I would not have off my top of my head. Okay, so if you look online, you can find the state's rate of reclamation report.
It's dated, the last one is...
And so let me address sometimes, we've done variances in the past, that's true, and we've done modifications. So we have what we permit with the state as a conceptual reclamation plan, and it covers the UMAM of the wetlands that we're going to put into the ground, and it covers how much lift that we're going to get from when we put those in, how much overall credits we're going to put into the ground from a UMAM perspective. And that conceptual reclamation plan, you can do modifications on it to resemble more the footprint that's in the field. You still have to hit all those credits, right? But they won't necessarily always be in the exact pinpoint geography. That wetland won't have the exact shape, because once nature starts taking its course and starts washing banks of wetlands, your shape can change. But in the end, in order to get release, you have to achieve those credits. Now, we have also asked for variances for time. She's right about that. And if you look at a forested wetland, in order to get the canopy cover that's required, it takes a lot of years to grow. And sometimes you have to go in and do supplemental plantings. And when you put those supplemental plantings in place, you're waiting for those trees to grow as well. But if you look at that rate of reclamation report, and the companies, Mosaic and our predecessor companies, weren't good about seeking release. We weren't. We put the reclamation in the ground and then not actually go to do the release and do the things that were necessary to get it there. That's changed in recent years, and if you look at the dramatic numbers of acres that have been released, I suggest to all of you to go home and Google that document. It's the rate of reclamation. It's a report by the state.
Rosalie, I have to say this. That report of reclamation is only up to 2014, and they rely on your numbers to prepare that report. So where are the numbers from 2014 that were supposed to go to the FDEP? And I've called the FDEP.
Annually. We submit annually.
Yeah, well, the last thing online is 2014.
We don't post the report, but we submit annually.
I called them and asked, and they said, we don't have the numbers, or we're still working on the numbers. This sounds like...
I can't speak on behalf
Right,
of the state. I'm
well-
sorry, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name's Tim Ritchie, and I'm an environmental advocate, and I'm with March Against Mosaic. I'm the founder. These are a few photographs that I took on November 29th. Look at that gyp stack. Now, I heard you earlier talking about max concentration levels, and I know when we go out from max concentration levels of those wells, I understand. Take a look at this water. Millions and millions and millions and millions of gallons of water every day taken from the aquifer, used for what? Tell you something. I've been reading this. This was written by a very good friend of mine, Candy Luther. I've been reading this at many BOCC meetings. Despite the fact that Mosaic discharges known toxins into the Peace River and into the Myakka River that flows into the Peace River, Manatee County approved a rezone of land last year from AG to extraction, which includes allowing mining in the Peace River and the Myakka River watersheds. And in July issued Mosaic a 5-year operating permit, knowing that these toxins will end up in the drinking water of 3 counties. These were toxins listed in the proposal from Mosaic for Manatee, and these include ammonia, sodium hydroxide, fluorosilic acid, gypsum, polychlorinated biphenyls, petroleum products. My question is, okay, these max MCLs, these are the levels of sodium and sulfur. They go out 100 feet, 500, 750, 1,000, 1,500 feet from these gypsum stacks. And I want you to know, because they know, and we all are going to find out soon, these are full of acidic radioactive wastewater. So I want to know, why should DeSoto County and why should any more citizens of Charlotte Harbor be accepting of the toxic pollution and destruction that's being done 24/7 from Hardy County, Fort Meade, my beautiful Peace River that I love. And those mining sites are right on the riverbanks. So how do we fix this?
So I'm a little confused by the question first, because you're talking about Manatee County where we only mine, but everything that you're citing has to do with chemical plants.
That's right. It has to do with
So
all of
what
Mosaic. Mosaic
You
has...
said our Manatee permit had all of these things in it.
That's
and
right.
I'm confused by that, because we wouldn't be permitting anything like that in Manatee County, because what we have here is a mine. It's
We
not-
have the documents for it on
Well, I'd
Mosaic
like-
letterhead.
I'd like to understand what you're referring to, because that doesn't comport
I'm
with a mine.
referring to all of the destruction and pollution that happens every day. I want to know about the clay retention ponds that are 40 feet high and about 500 acres round with pollution. How many hundreds of years will they be there?
I'm sorry that we've run out of time.
Thank you very much.
And I want to I want to thank the speakers for coming today. It's a tough topic, and I appreciate the audience coming today to listen and learn and make up your mind. And I appreciate the speakers' efforts. And we also want to thank METV for taping our program so that those who couldn't make this meeting can watch it on television. And they can also watch it on their computer screens with a link to the YouTube link. And just keep checking our website for the link. And next month, we're going to have a hot topic on the opioid crisis. And we're going to hear from 4 representatives of healthcare organizations that work on this terrible issue, which is really bad in Manatee County. We also encourage you to join our league. There are forms on the table. And to get to METV, go on to www.metvweb.com and click on their YouTube link. Give them at least a week to get it up, and then you'll see it on there. And we appreciate your coming. And we welcome you to any of our meetings. You can find out more information about what we're doing on the back table. Thank you.